We'll speak now with Barbara Slavin. She's a distinguished fellow at the Stimson Center's Middle East and North Africa program. Thank you very much for joining us. Some experts are arguing that both Israeli and Hamas leaders stand to gain more by continuing this conflict rather than pursuing a ceasefire, as they're trying to bid for time to secure the best deal. And would you agree with that? What's your assessment?
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm not sure I entirely agree with that. I think that in this case, it's the Israelis that have put forward new demands to maintain control over the border between Hamas and Egypt, to maintain troops within Gaza, to monitor and screen Palestinians trying to return to their homes in North Gaza. The United States is trying very hard to find ways to convince Hamas to accept these demands. But after 10 months, after so much death and destruction, I think Hamas is saying, there is a limit. And of course, they are still holding on to hostages. Many of them have probably died by now, but some are still alive. And their view is that if they're going to release those hostages, they want to be sure that the Israelis are going to stop bombarding Gaza and is going to remove troops. So it's a difficult issue. I mean, I agree with your correspondent. As long as one can maintain at least the illusion of progress, it is a disincentive to the Iranians and to Hezbollah to retaliate against Israel for the assassination of important figures. And that is something that we certainly welcome. But this has been very difficult. The Israelis have been very, very tough. And Hamas realizes that once they give up hostages, they lose leverage.
So, Barbara, if a ceasefire agreement is reached, what kind of concessions might both sides be willing to make sure that both Netanyahu and Sinwar can claim victory?
Well, look, these people are experienced in spinning various developments in their favor. Hamas will certainly say that the Palestinian issue was put back on the world's agenda in an extremely dramatic way. No one can say now that the Palestinian issue has been forgotten. At the same time, of course, the loss of life and destruction has been horrendous. In addition to Israel stopping, at least for a period of time, attacks on Gaza, Hamas will obtain the release of hundreds of Palestinian political prisoners, including some quite important figures. This would be a major accomplishment on the part of Hamas. The other thing that they've done is that they've stalled any effort to normalize relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which I think was a key goal in the timing of the Hamas attack last October. On the Israeli side, it depends on who you talk to in Israel. There are many Israelis who are extremely unhappy with Netanyahu, with the decision to continue this war. Hundreds of Israeli soldiers have been killed, in addition to this absolutely outrageous and egregious death toll of Palestinian civilians and the destruction of 70% of Gaza. So there is going to be a reckoning for Netanyahu once the war stops. And this is one of the reasons, frankly, why he seems reluctant to end it.
Barbara, I want to ask you about one of the more encouraging aspects, if you like, of the ongoing ceasefire talks. Reports suggesting that negotiators are forming a new implementation cell that will handle the release of hostages and the distribution of aid once, a deal is reached. Now, is this normal? Meaning, is this part of the usual process of negotiations, or is this really a sign that actual progress might be made?
Well, one of the things that's very important, obviously, besides the release of prisoners and hostages, is surging humanitarian relief into Gaza. The official death toll is 40,000. Many people think it's much higher. We've had reports just in the last few days that polio has reemerged, at least one case reported of polio, and health authorities want to be able to get in there and vaccinate children against polio, a disease that had been eliminated in Gaza, for decades and in most of the world. So there are urgent needs, and I'm sure there's a great deal of planning that's going on in terms of how to surge this kind of humanitarian aid into Gaza. But the prerequisite is a ceasefire. And every time we get close, I don't know if your listeners are familiar with an American cartoon called Peanuts, but there is a character called Charlie Brown, and he's trying to grab a football. And every time he goes to grab this football, a character named Lucy pulls it away. And I've been comparing the Gaza ceasefire to the football. I would say that that the Palestinians are and Biden are Charlie Brown, and Lucy is Bibi Netanyahu. He pulls that football away every time we seem to get close to it.
I'm glad you brought that up because the Democratic National Convention kicks off today. Now, is that going to make Blinken work just a bit harder? I mean, he's working very hard, I know that, but is it going to be, him working even harder and maybe even playing hardball? Because I imagine a ceasefire announcement at DNC would be massive for, Harris, Walz, as well as Joe Biden.
I think Tony Blinken is working very hard, regardless of conventions or not. There is a limited time for him as Secretary of State. There's a limited time for Joe Biden's presidency to make something out of the nightmare that we have seen in the Middle East over the last 10 months. So I'm not sure he needs any extra incentives. But you do point out that this is a very important political issue, particularly for the Democrats. There will be protests outside and inside the convention over the fact that there is no ceasefire yet. There are many in the Democratic Party who think Joe Biden has gone much too easy on Israel, has provided much too much in the way of military assistance, that there should have been more restrictions placed on military aid and on the ways in which Israel has used it. So it is definitely going to be a factor in the convention. One other point, and that is Netanyahu, I think, has been operating, or at least until recently, was operating on the presumption that that the Democrats would lose and that Trump would become president again. Given the polls, which show Kamala Harris ahead, that's not an assumption that Netanyahu can continue to make. But he may still be holding out as long as he possibly can to kill and damage even more, rather than wait for U.S. elections and see the result. We will see. But this is a very tense time, not just in the Middle East.
All right, Barbara, thank you very much for your time and for your insight this morning. I've been speaking to Barbara Slavin, Distinguished Fellow in Middle East and North Africa at the Stimson Center.